I still remember the afternoon Big Earl Thompson showed me something down at his Alabama boat shed that changed everything I thought I knew about attracting fish. Earl was 83 years old at the time, spent 67 years fishing the Tennessee River tributaries, and when he pulled that old mason jar off his workbench, he didn't say much. He just smiled, unscrewed the lid, and told me to watch what happened when he dropped a spoonful into the water off his dock. 30 seconds. That's all it took. The surface erupted like someone had rung a dinner bell underwater. Now, if you're interested in seeing how these old Southern methods really perform compared to the expensive attractants they're selling at Bass Pro, consider subscribing. That's exactly what this channel is about, testing what actually works versus what we're told to buy. What Earl showed me that day wasn't some miracle chemical. It was mustard, plain yellow mustard, the kind that costs about 10 cents per spoonful if you buy the big jar. And before you think this sounds ridiculous, I'm going to show you exactly what happened when I tested this against $70 fish attractant gel during identical conditions on the same lake, same week, same water temperature. The location was Lake Guntersville, northern Alabama, early September. Water temperature holding steady at 74 degrees. Partly cloudy skies, light southwest wind around 6 miles per hour. I set up 2 identical rigs about 40 yards apart along a submerged creek channel where I knew crappie and smallmouth bass were staging before the fall transition. Same depth, same structure, same bait on both lines. Live minnows hooked through the back, nothing fancy. First spot got the premium gel attractant. Bright green stuff that smells like concentrated anise and shrimp. Costs about $18 per tube and supposedly uses amino acid technology and pheromone triggers. I applied it exactly like the instructions said, coated the bait, squeezed a little extra into the water near the line, waited. Second spot got 1 heaping tablespoon of yellow mustard dropped directly into the water about 2 feet from where my line entered. No mixing, no preparation, just straight from the jar into the lake. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. Within 30 seconds of that mustard hitting the water, I saw the first shadow move underneath. By the time I reached 1 minute, there were visible swirls on the surface directly above where I'd dropped it. The water looked nervous, active. At 2 minutes and 10 seconds, my bobber went under hard and I pulled up a 14-inch crappie that hit like it was angry. Meanwhile, the expensive gel spot stayed quiet for another 18 minutes. By the end of that first hour, the mustard location had produced 9 fish, 7 crappie between 12 and 15 inches, and 2 smallmouth bass just over the legal keeper size. The gel spot produced 2 small crappie, both under 10 inches, and one of them barely hooked. Now here's what most people don't know. Big Earl Thompson wasn't the first person to figure this out. This method goes back further than most living fishermen today. My grandfather, who fished these same Alabama waters during the Great Depression, told me stories about dock fishermen in the 1930s using mustard and other pantry staples because they couldn't afford store-bought bait, let alone attractants. They weren't trying to invent some clever trick. They were just using what they had. And they noticed something. Fish responded. Earl learned it from a man named Claude Perkins, a Tennessee river guide who ran John boats out of Decatur back in the 1950s. Claude was part Creek Indian, part Irish, and he grew up watching his grandmother use mustard in ways most people today would never think of. Not just for fishing, she used it in poultices, in preservation methods, in things that sound strange now, but made perfect sense when you didn't have access to a pharmacy or a tackle shop. Claude passed the fishing application to Earl sometime around 1962, and Earl had been using it quietly ever since. Never made a big deal about it, never told many people, just used it when the bite was slow and he needed results. When I asked Earl why he thought it worked so well, he leaned back in his lawn chair, sipped his coffee, and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Son, fish don't think like we do. They don't care about packaging or marketing. They respond to chemical signals that tell them food is present. Mustard creates a cloud in the water that disperses slow and smells like something biological breaking down. To a fish, that smells like opportunity." And he was right. But let me walk you through exactly how to use this, because there's a method to it that makes all the difference. First, you need the right mustard. Not Dijon, not spicy brown, not honey mustard, plain yellow mustard. The classic American stuff made with vinegar, turmeric, and ground mustard seed. The ingredients matter because it's the combination of acetic acid from the vinegar and the sulfur compounds in the mustard seed that create the reaction in the water. You can buy a 20-ounce squeeze bottle for about $2 at any grocery store. One bottle will last you months of fishing trips. Second, timing matters. You don't just dump mustard randomly into the water and hope. You apply it strategically near structure where fish are already likely to be holding. Submerged brush piles, creek channels, drop-offs, rocky points, anywhere you'd normally expect predator fish to stage or ambush prey. The mustard doesn't magically summon fish from a mile away. What it does is trigger a feeding response in fish that are already nearby but not actively biting. Here's the exact process I use. I drop 1 tablespoon of mustard into the water approximately 2 to 3 feet from where my bait is positioned. I let it sink naturally. Mustard is denser than water, so it doesn't float. It descends in a slow, spreading cloud that looks almost like yellow smoke underwater. As it disperses, it releases volatile compounds into the current. If there's any movement in the water at all, even just a slight thermal layer shift, that scent cloud will drift along the structure and reach fish that are sitting tight. You wait. 30 seconds minimum. Usually within that first minute, if fish are present, you'll see subtle changes on the surface. Small boils, nervous water. Sometimes you'll see baitfish scatter, which tells you something larger just moved in underneath. That's your window. That's when you need to be ready, because the strike often comes fast and aggressive. Now let's talk about why this actually works. Because it's not magic, and it's not some superstitious old-timer nonsense. There's real biology happening here. Mustard contains compounds called glucosinolates. When mustard seed is crushed and mixed with liquid, those compounds break down into isothiocyanates, which are sulfur-based molecules. In the air, we recognize that as the sharp, pungent smell of mustard. Underwater, fish detect it through their lateral line system and their olfactory receptors, which are incredibly sensitive to amino acids and sulfur compounds. To a predator, fish like a bass or a crappie, sulfur-based scent in the water signals decomposition, which signals the presence of dying or injured baitfish, which signals an easy meal. The vinegar component also plays a role. Acetic acid lowers the pH in the immediate area where the mustard disperses, and that slight acidic shift can mimic the chemical signature of stressed prey. Fish have evolved to detect these environmental cues because they indicate feeding opportunities with minimal energy expenditure. It makes sense from a survival perspective. Why chase healthy, fast-moving prey when you can target something that's already compromised? There's also an osmotic pressure effect. When mustard enters the water, it creates a localized concentration gradient. Fish are constantly regulating their internal salt and water balance, and they're highly attuned to changes in the surrounding water chemistry. That gradient draws their attention the same way blood in the water attracts sharks. It's a biological alarm system that says something worth investigating is happening right here, right now. After that first successful test at Guntersville, I wanted to see if this was a fluke, or if it would hold up under different conditions. So I ran the same comparison test at 3 additional locations over the next 2 weeks. Lake Wheeler in northern Alabama, Pickwick Lake on the Tennessee border, and a private farm pond outside Cullman that's known for holding big bluegill and channel catfish. At Wheeler, the results were even more dramatic. I used mustard on one side of a submerged roadbed and the gel attractant on the other. Same rigs, same live bait. Same depth at about 12 feet. Water was slightly stained from recent rain. Visibility maybe 18 inches. The mustard spot produced 11 fish in 90 minutes. 8 crappie, 2 small largemouth bass, and 1 channel catfish that went about 3 pounds. The gel spot produced 4 fish, and 2 of them were barely hooked in the outer lip, like they'd bumped the bait more than committed to it. At Pickwick, I fished near the old railroad trestle pilings, where smallmouth bass and drum tend to hold during low light conditions. I dropped mustard near the 3rd piling from the north bank and used gel near the 5th piling, about 30 yards downstream. Current was moving slow but steady, maybe half a mile per hour. Within the first 45 minutes, the mustard location gave me 6 smallmouth bass between 13 and 16 inches. The gel location gave me 1 small drum and a lot of waiting. The farm pond was different. Smaller body of water, less current, warmer temperature. I wasn't sure how well the mustard would perform in nearly still water with high visibility. But I tried it anyway near a fallen oak tree that created a shaded pocket along the east bank. Dropped a tablespoon in, waited, and watched the cloud spread out slower than it did in the lakes. It took almost 2 full minutes before I saw any surface activity, but when the bluegill showed up, they showed up in numbers. I counted at least 15 individual fish circling the area within 5 minutes, and I pulled 7 of them out in the next half hour, every one of them palm-sized or bigger. Meanwhile, the gel spot on the opposite bank stayed dead quiet except for 1 small bite that didn't stick. What I started noticing across all these tests was consistency. It wasn't just that the mustard worked, it was that it worked reliably in different water types, different structures, different species. Crappie responded, bass responded, catfish responded, bluegill responded. Even carp, which I wasn't targeting, started showing up in the mustard zones. There's something else worth mentioning. The effect isn't permanent. The scent cloud disperses over time, usually within 15 to 20 minutes depending on current and water movement. So if you're fishing a spot for an extended period and the activity dies down, you can reapply. 1 tablespoon every 20 minutes is more than enough to keep the area active without oversaturating it. I've found that using too much actually seems to reduce effectiveness, probably because it creates too strong a concentration and fish get cautious. Subtlety works better than saturation. Now, I know what some people are thinking. What about the color? Doesn't bright yellow mustard spook fish in clear water? Fair question. And honestly, I thought the same thing before I tested it. But here's what I observed. In stained or murky water, the color is irrelevant because visibility is already limited. The fish are relying almost entirely on scent and vibration to locate food. In clear water, the mustard cloud disperses quickly enough that it doesn't create a solid yellow mass. It becomes more of a faint haze that blends into the natural particulate in the water column. I've watched it underwater using a GoPro on a drop line, and by the time the cloud reaches 5 feet from the source, it's almost invisible to the human eye. But the chemical signature is still there, still active, still detectable by fish. I also tested this during different times of day to see if light conditions affected the results. Early morning, late afternoon, overcast midday, and 1 session right at dusk. The mustard performed well across all of them, but I noticed the strongest response seemed to come during low light periods, early and late in the day. That makes sense when you consider that many predator fish rely more heavily on scent and lateral line detection when visual hunting is limited. The mustard gives them something to lock onto when they can't see as clearly. One afternoon, I was fishing a deep channel drop on Lake Guntersville, about 22 feet down, where the old river channel cuts through. I wasn't getting any bites using my usual setup, so I decided to try the mustard in deeper water than I'd used it before. Dropped a tablespoon and let it sink all the way down near the bottom where my bait was sitting. Took about 4 minutes before anything happened, which is longer than usual, but when the first fish hit, it was a solid 2-pound smallmouth that fought harder than anything I'd caught all week. Then another one 10 minutes later. Then a Channel Catfish that went close to 5 pounds and nearly spooled me before I got it in. What I realized is that the mustard works vertically just as well as it works horizontally. The scent doesn't just spread outward, it drifts upward and downward with thermal layers and current eddies, covering more of the water column than you'd expect from such a small amount. I started experimenting with variations to see if I could refine the method even further. I tried mixing the mustard with a little bit of lake water before dropping it in, thinking that pre-diluting it might help it disperse faster. Didn't make much difference. I tried warming the mustard slightly to see if heat would intensify the scent release. No noticeable improvement. I even tried adding a tiny bit of garlic powder to the mustard to see if layering scents would increase effectiveness. It didn't hurt, but it didn't help either. Plain yellow mustard, straight from the jar, seemed to be the optimal approach. There's a practical side to this that's worth appreciating too. A bottle of mustard weighs almost nothing, takes up minimal space in your tackle box, doesn't require refrigeration, doesn't spoil in the heat, and costs less than a single pack of soft plastic lures. If you forget it at home, you can stop at any gas station or corner store and pick up a replacement for pocket change. Compare that to specialty attractants that need to be ordered online, stored carefully, and replaced frequently because they dry out or lose potency. The simplicity is part of the appeal. I think that's what Big Earl understood all those years. Fishing doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. The fish don't care what brand is printed on the label. They care about chemical signals that make biological sense to them. Mustard creates those signals. It's been doing it since before there was a fishing industry trying to sell us solutions to problems we didn't know we had. Over the course of a month, I logged every trip where I used the mustard method and compared it to trips where I used traditional attractants or no attractant at all. 23 outings total. 14 of them used mustard. 9 used either gel attractants or nothing. The mustard trips averaged 8.2 fish per outing. The non-mustard trips averaged 3.6 fish per outing. Same lakes, same seasonal patterns, same general techniques. The difference was consistent enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like evidence. And it wasn't just about numbers. The quality of the bites changed too. Fish that hit in the mustard zone seemed more committed. Fewer short strikes. Fewer fish that bumped the bait and spooked. When they hit with intention, like they were confident the food source was real and worth the energy expenditure. I showed this method to a few other fishermen I know, guys who've been fishing Alabama and Tennessee waters for decades. Most of them were skeptical at first. One of them laughed and said I'd lost my mind. But every single one of them who actually tried it came back with the same reaction: surprise, disbelief, and then quiet acceptance that maybe the old ways still have something to teach us. There's a guy named Ron Fletcher who fishes out of a little landing near Bridgeport, Alabama. He's 71, been fishing Nickajack Lake since he was a kid. I told him about the mustard and he said he'd give it a shot but didn't expect much. 2 weeks later I ran into him at the bait shop and he pulled me aside. He said he'd used it 4 times and caught more crappie in those 4 trips than he'd caught in the previous month combined. He wanted to know if there was some trick to it, some secret ratio or technique I wasn't telling him. I told him the same thing I'm telling you now. 1 tablespoon. Drop it near your bait. Wait 30 seconds. That's it. It's interesting how some of the best fishing knowledge doesn't come from product catalogs or YouTube algorithms or sponsored pro anglers. It comes from people like Earl Thompson and Claude Perkins and my grandfather, people who spent their lives on the water because they had to, not because it was a hobby or a brand. They figured out what worked through necessity and repetition, and paying attention to details that most of us overlook now. I've thought a lot about why methods like this get forgotten. Part of it is generational. When the people who knew these things pass away, the knowledge goes with them, unless someone writes it down or passes it along. Part of it is economic. The fishing industry makes money by convincing us that effectiveness requires expense. If everyone knew that a $2 bottle of mustard could outperform an $18 gel, that's a problem for the companies selling the gel. And part of it is cultural. We've been conditioned to believe that newer is better, that technology always beats tradition, that if something is old, it must be outdated. But fish don't read marketing materials. They respond to biology. That's what keeps bringing me back to tests like this. Not because I'm trying to prove some point about the industry or sell anyone on a miracle trick. Just because I'm genuinely curious whether the things our grandfathers did still work, and if they do, whether they work better than what we're being sold today. So far, the answer keeps coming back the same. They work. Often better, almost always cheaper, and usually simpler. The mustard method isn't going to turn a bad fishing day into a great one if the fish aren't there, or the conditions are completely wrong. It's not magic. But if the fish are present and you're struggling to get them to commit, or if you're fishing pressured water where the fish have seen every lure and scent on the market, this gives you an edge that most people aren't using. It's different enough to stand out. It's simple enough to be reliable. and it's cheap enough that you can use it freely without worrying about running out or wasting money. I'm still using it regularly, probably 2 out of every 3 trips now. I keep a small squeeze bottle of it in my tackle box next to my pliers and my scale, right where I used to keep the expensive gel. The gel is still in there, but I haven't opened it in over a month. Haven't needed to. And I'll tell you something else. There's a satisfaction that comes from catching fish using something this simple. It's not about being better than anyone else or proving anything to the world. It's just the quiet confidence of knowing that you don't need the latest gadget or the most expensive product to succeed. You just need to understand what the fish are responding to and give it to them in a way that makes sense. Big Earl passed away last April, 87 years old. Died in his sleep after a lifetime on the water. I think about him sometimes when I'm out on the lake, especially when I'm using the mustard. I think about that afternoon in his boat shed when he showed me something so simple it almost felt like a joke, and how it turned out to be one of the most effective techniques I've ever used. He didn't need credit for it, didn't want attention, just wanted to pass along something that worked, the same way someone had passed it along to him. Sometimes you realize those old dock regulars knew more than we thought. If you value that kind of wisdom, you might enjoy what we do here. Subscribe if that sounds like you. And I'd genuinely like to know, was there someone in your life who shaped the way you fish? Someone who showed you something simple that just worked? I'd appreciate hearing that story in the comments.